In fog-choked London, a widow's desperate telegram. My husband's death, no accident, summons Sherlock Holmes to unravel a deadly conspiracy. A colonel's murder on Hampstead Heath, veiled threats typed on a sinister machine, and whispers of cursed Punjab gold lead Holmes and Watson through a maze of betrayal. Allies turn traitors, and a mastermind lurks, pulling strings from India's shadows. But what if the treasure is no gold, but a secret that could topple empires? One final twist awaits someone closer than Holmes' suspects holds the key to it all. Chapter 1. The enigmatic missive in the waning months of 1897. As the fog of London wove its familiar tapestry of gloom about the gaslit streets of Baker Street, I found myself once more in the company of my singular friend, Sherlock Holmes. The air within our modest lodgings at 2-1B was thick with the acrid tang of a chemical experiment, the nature of which I could only guess at, involving a bubbling retort and a noxious green vapor that curled lazily toward the ceiling. Holmes, clad in his mouse-colored dressing gown, was bent over his work table, his lean frame silhouetted against the flickering flame of a Bunsen burner, his aquiline features set in that intense concentration which betokened the pursuit of some elusive truth. I, John H. Watson, M.D., late of the Army Medical Department, sat by the fire, my attention divided between the morning's Times and the curious antics of my companion. The world beyond our windows was a blur of grey, the clatter of hooves and the cries of street vendors muffled by the dense atmosphere. It was a morning much like any other in our long association. Yet I sensed in Holmes a restlessness, a hunger for a problem worthy of his prodigious intellect. His recent cases a trifling matter of a stolen cameo and a dispute over a forged will had failed to ignite that spark which so often illuminated his remarkable faculties. It was at this juncture, as I turned the page of my newspaper to read of a minor scandal in the House of Lords, that a sharp rap at the door broke the silence. Mrs. Hudson, our ever-patient landlady, entered, her face bearing an expression of mingled concern and exasperation. In her hand she held a telegram, its yellow envelope a stark contrast to the muted tones of the room. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice tinged with unease, "this arrived not 10 minutes ago. The boy who brought it seemed in a dreadful hurry, and I thought it best to bring it up at once." Holmes, without looking up from his experiment, extended a long, thin hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Pray, place it on the table." She did so, casting a glance at me as if to seek reassurance, before withdrawing with a soft rustle of her skirts. I watched as Holmes, after a moment's pause to adjust the flame beneath his retort, took up the telegram with a deliberation that belied the urgency of its delivery. He slit the envelope with a penknife, unfolded the paper within, and scanned its contents. His brows lifted slightly, a sign I had learned to interpret as one of piqued interest. "Curious," he murmured, his voice low and thoughtful. He passed the telegram to me, his eyes already returning to the retort, as if the message were but a fleeting distraction. I took the paper and read the brief. Stark words printed upon it. "Mr. Holmes, 2-1B, Baker Street. Urgent. My husband's death. No accident. Fear for my life. Come at once. Mr. E. Vane. To Jublas. Larkspur Road, Kensington." The words, though few, carried a weight of desperation that sent a chill through me. "A widow's plea," I remarked, handing the telegram back to Holmes. "She suspects foul play in her husband's death." Holmes extinguished the burner with a precise turn of his wrist, the green vapor dissipating into the air. More than that, Watson, he said, rising and crossing to the window, where he parted the curtains to peer into the fog. The brevity of the message, the choice of telegraph over a letter, and the address in Kensington suggest a woman of means under acute distress. The phrase, "fear for my life," is not one used lightly. "We shall visit Mrs. Vane at once." I protested mildly, citing the lateness of the hour and the impenetrability of the fog. But Holmes was already donning his overcoat, his movements swift and purposeful. "The fog, Watson, is our ally," he said, a faint smile playing upon his lips. "It cloaks our movements as surely as it hides the machinations of those who would do harm. Come, the game is afoot." Within a quarter of an hour, we were in a hansom cab, the horses' hooves clattering against the cobblestones as we made our way toward Kensington. The fog was a living thing, curling about the cab like the tendrils of some spectral beast, and I could scarce make out the outlines of the buildings we passed. Holmes sat in silence, his profile sharp against the dim glow of the cab's lamp, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts, which were no doubt racing through a labyrinth of possibilities that my own mind could scarcely navigate as we traversed the city. My thoughts turned to the telegram. The name Vane was unfamiliar to me, yet the address Larkspur Road suggested a degree of affluence. Kensington was a district of elegant houses and well-to-do families, not the sort of place one associated with murder or intrigue. Yet the urgency of Mrs. Vane's message spoke of a darkness lurking beneath the veneer of respectability. I wondered what manner of man her husband had been, and what circumstances could have led to his death being deemed an accident by the authorities, yet murdered by his widow. The cab slowed as we entered Larkspur Road, a quiet street lined with Georgian houses, their facades rendered ghostly by the fog. Number 17 was a handsome residence, its black door gleaming with fresh paint, its brass knocker polished to a high sheen. Yet the windows were shrouded in heavy curtains, giving the house an air of secrecy, as if it guarded some terrible truth within its walls. We alighted from the cab, and Holmes paid the driver with a brisk efficiency before mounting the steps. He rapped sharply on the knocker, the sound echoing in the stillness. After a moment, the door was opened by a maid, her face pale and her eyes wide with apprehension. She was young, no more than 20, and her hands trembled as she took our coats. Double quotes. "Mrs. Vane is expecting you, sirs," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, follow me." We were led into a drawing room furnished with quiet, elegant mahogany furniture, a Persian rug, and a fireplace where a low fire burned, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Mrs. Eleanor Vane stood by the hearth, her figure erect despite the evident strain upon her features. She was a woman of perhaps 40, her dark hair streaked with grey, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. Her dress, though mourning black, was of fine quality, and her bearing spoke of a strength tempered by grief. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice steady, though it carried a faint tremor. "Thank you for coming so promptly. I fear I am in great danger." Holmes took the chair she indicated, his gaze fixed upon her with that intensity which I had seen unnerve even the most hardened of men. "Pray, be seated, Mrs. Vane," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "Tell us everything from the beginning. Omit no detail, however trivial it may seem." She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and began her tale. "My husband, Colonel Rupert Vane, died 3 weeks ago on Hampstead Heath. He was an avid rider, and it was his custom to take his horse out each morning. The police said he was thrown when his horse bolted, and he struck his head on a stone. They called it an accident, but I know it was not. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What leads you to this conclusion, madame? She rose and crossed to a small lacquered box on a side table, from which she drew a bundle of papers tied with a ribbon. These letters, she said, handing them to Holmes. They were sent to my husband in the weeks before his death. They contain veiled threats, though the police dismissed them as pranks. And yesterday, I received this. She handed him a second telegram, its message even briefer than the first. Leave London or join your husband. Holmes examined the letters, his long fingers turning the pages with care. They were typed, not handwritten, and bore no signature. The paper was of good quality, but the postmarks varied: Charing Cross, Paddington, Whitechapel. The telegram, however, was from a single office in Whitechapel, a detail that caused Holmes's lips to curl faintly. The letters are typed on a Remington No. 2, he said, almost to himself. The E is misaligned, a common fault in older models. The postmarks suggest a sender who moves about the city or employs others to do so. The telegram, however, is our key. Whitechapel is not a place you or your husband would frequent, I presume. Mrs. Vane shook her head. Never. My husband was a retired officer of the Indian Army. He served in the Punjab and later advised on military matters here in London. He was a private man, with few friends and, to my knowledge, no enemies. No enemies, Holmes mused, his eyes still on the letters. Yet someone wishes you harm. Tell me, Mrs. Vane, what was your husband's routine in the days before his death? Did he mention anything unusual, strangers calling, letters received, or changes in his demeanor? She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the arms of her chair. He was preoccupied, she admitted. He spent long hours in his study, going through old papers from his time in India. He mentioned a name once, Hargrave, I think, but said no more when I pressed him. Hargrave, Holmes repeated, his voice sharp. And what of his rides on the heath? Did he always take the same path? Yes, always along the western ridge. He said it reminded him of the open country in India. Holmes folded the letters and telegram, slipping them into his pocket. We shall investigate, Mrs. Vane. For now, remain vigilant. Admit no strangers, and inform me at once if you receive further communications. I shall send a boy to check on you daily. She nodded, her relief palpable. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I feel safer knowing you are on the case. As we left the house, the fog seemed to press closer, as if conspiring to obscure the truth. In the cab, I ventured to break the silence. What do you make of it, Holmes? A widow's fear, or something more sinister? Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Sinister, Watson, and complex. The letters suggest a campaign of intimidation, but the telegram is a direct threat. The choice of Whitechapel for its dispatch is telling a deliberate attempt to obscure the sender's identity. And this Hargrave, his name, is no coincidence. We must learn more of Colonel Vane's past. Our return to Baker Street was marked by Holmes's customary silence, broken only by his occasional murmur as he turned over the facts in his mind. Upon arrival, he lit his pipe and settled into his armchair. The letters and telegrams spread before him. The game is afoot, Watson, he said at last. Tomorrow we begin in Whitechapel. But first I must consult my index. He rose and crossed to the shelves, where his meticulously kept records of London's criminal and social undercurrents were housed. For an hour he pored over the volumes, his fingers flicking through pages with the precision of a surgeon. At length, he closed the book with a snap. "Captain Roger Hargrave," he said, his voice tinged with satisfaction, "court-martialed in 1879 for embezzling regimental funds under Colonel Vane's command. Released from prison in 1885, he vanished from public record. A man with motive, Watson, and perhaps the means to exact revenge. But why threaten the widow?" I asked. "If Hargrave sought vengeance, why not act sooner?" Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "That, my dear Watson, is the question we must answer. Revenge is a patient vice, and Hargrave may have waited for the opportune moment. Or perhaps there is another player in this drama, one whose shadow we have yet to see." As the fire burned low, I reflected on the day's events. The widow's plea, the cryptic letters, the ominous telegram pointed to a mystery as dense as the fog outside. Yet with Holmes at the helm, I had no doubt that the truth, however elusive, would be brought to light. Little did I know the twists that awaited us, or the depths of human greed and betrayal we would uncover in the days to come. Chapter 2. The House on Larkspur Road, the fog that had cloaked our journey to Kensington. The previous evening had not relented by the following morning, as Sherlock Holmes and I set out once more for Larkspur Road. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint tang of coal smoke and the distant rumble of London's ceaseless activity. Holmes, seated beside me in the hansom cab, was silent, his sharp features drawn into a mask of contemplation. His long fingers, clasped about the head of his stick, tapped an irregular rhythm, a sure sign that his mind was already dissecting the threads of the mystery before us. I, too, was lost in thought, pondering the enigmatic telegram from Mrs. Eleanor Vane and the ominous letters that had preceded her husband's death. The name Hargrave, mentioned so fleetingly by the widow, lingered in my mind, a shadow cast by a past yet to be illuminated. Holmes's discovery of Captain Roger Hargrave's court-martial under Colonel Vane's command had provided a tantalizing clue, but it raised as many questions as it answered. Why, after so many years, would Hargrave resurface to threaten the widow? And what role did the Whitechapel Telegraph Office play in this intricate web? Our cab drew to a halt before 17 Larkspur Road, its black door and polished brass knocker as imposing as they had been the night before. The curtains remained drawn, lending the house an air of mourning that went beyond the widow's black attire. Holmes rapped sharply, and the same pale-faced maid, her eyes still wide with nervous apprehension, admitted us. She led us through a hall adorned with portraits of stern-faced men in military garb and outwardly ancestors of the late Colonel Van, to the drawing-room where Mrs. Vane awaited. She stood by a tall window, her silhouette framed against the muted light filtering through the heavy drapes. Her face, though composed, bore the marks of sleepless nights, and her hands, clasped before her, betrayed a faint tremor. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice steady but low, "I cannot thank you enough for returning so promptly. I have scarcely closed my eyes since our meeting last night." Holmes took the chair she indicated, his gaze sweeping the room with that rapid, all-seeing intensity that missed nothing. "You have received no further communications, I trust?" he asked, his tone brisk. "None," she replied, seating herself opposite him. "But I feel as though I am watched, Mr. Holmes. Last evening, as I sat here alone, I heard footsteps outside the garden gates, slow, deliberate steps that paused and then retreated. I dared not look out." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Did you inform the police?" She shook her head. "I feared they would dismiss it as nerves, as they did my husband's letters. Inspector Gregson called them crank missives and refused to investigate further. Gregson, Holmes murmured, a faint note of disdain in his voice. A man of limited imagination. Describe the footsteps, Mrs. Vane. Were they heavy, as of a man, or lighter, regular or halting? She considered. For a moment, heavy, I think, and measured. Not hurried, but purposeful, as if the person wished to be heard. Holmes nodded, filing the detail away. And your husband's study, may we examine it? His papers may hold clues to the motive behind these threats. Mrs. Vane rose, leading us down a corridor to a room at the rear of the house. The study was a masculine domain, its walls lined with bookshelves and maps of the Indian subcontinent, its air heavy with the scent of old leather and tobacco. A broad desk stood before a window overlooking a small garden, its surface cluttered with papers, a silver inkstand, and a photograph of a younger Mrs. Vane, her smile untouched by the grief that now marked her. Holmes moved to the desk with the precision of a hawk, his fingers deftly sorting through the papers. Colonel Vane was methodical, he observed, lifting a ledger bound in green leather. These are accounts of his military service dates, campaigns, commendations, and here a correspondence with the War Office, dated 6 months ago. He was consulted on the fortification of garrisons in the Punjab. I peered over his shoulder, noting the meticulous handwriting. Could this be connected to Hargrave? I asked. Possibly, Holmes replied, his attention now on a locked drawer in the desk. Mrs. Vane, have you the key to this? She hesitated, then produced a small key from a chain about her neck. My husband kept it locked. He said it contained private matters. Holmes turned the key, revealing a compartment containing a single item, a faded journal, its pages yellowed with age. He opened it, scanning the entries with rapid intensity. This is from 1878, he said, his voice low. The year of the Punjab rebellion. Your husband writes of a treasure gold looted from a rebel stronghold, hidden to prevent its falling into enemy hands. He does not say where, but he mentions a trusted officer, one Major Edmund Thorne. Mrs. Vane's eyes widened. Major Thorne. He visited us once, years ago, when we first returned to England. My husband spoke highly of him, but they parted on strained terms. I never knew why. Holmes closed the journal, slipping it into his coat. This may be the key, Mrs. Vane. The mention of a treasure explains much the threats, the secrecy, perhaps even your husband's death. We must learn more of Major Thorne and his connection to Hargrave. As we returned to the drawing room, Holmes paused by a side table, his attention caught by a small object half hidden beneath a lace doilier brass button, its surface embossed with the crest of the Punjab regiment. Curious, he said, holding it to the light. This is not an item one leaves carelessly about. Was your husband in the habit of keeping regimental relics here? Mrs. Vane shook her head. No, he kept such things in his study or at his club. I have never seen that button before. Holmes pocketed it, his expression unreadable. Someone has been in this house, Mrs. Vane. Someone who left this behind, perhaps unwittingly. We shall return to Baker Street and pursue these leads. In the meantime, I urge you to accept police protection. I shall arrange for Inspector Lestrade to send a man. She nodded, her face pale but resolute. I trust you, Mr. Holmes. Please, find who did this to my husband. As we stepped into the fog once more, I felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The journal, the button, the footsteps in the night all pointed to a conspiracy rooted in the distant past, yet its tendrils reached into the present with deadly intent. In the cab, I ventured to voice my thoughts. "Holmes, do you suspect Hargrave left the button? Or could it be this Major Thorne?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "The button is a clue, Watson, but not to the identity of its owner yet. It is a military relic, likely dropped by one who served with Vane. Hargrave is a possibility, but Thorne's name in the journal suggests a deeper connection. We must tread carefully, for the treasure mentioned may be the motive, and gold has a way of drawing out the worst in men." Back at Baker Street, Holmes lit his pipe and spread the journal. Letters and telegram before him, his mind already weaving the disparate threads into a pattern. "Tomorrow, Watson," he said, exhaling a cloud of smoke, "we visit the Whitechapel telegraph office. The sender of that telegram is our first link to the truth, and I shall send a wire to the War Office regarding Major Thorne. The past, it seems, is not yet done with us." As I retired to my room, the fog outside seemed a mirror to the mystery within, a swirling, impenetrable veil that only Sherlock Holmes could pierce. Little did I know the labyrinth of deceit and danger that awaited us, or the startling revelations that would soon turn our understanding of the case upon its head. Chapter 3. The trail begins the morning following our second visit to Larkspur. Road dawned with a reluctant sun piercing the remnants of the fog, casting a pale light over Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes, ever the creature of irregular habits, had scarcely slept, as evidenced by the disarray of our sitting-room papers strewn across the table, his violin resting precariously on the arm of his chair, and the air thick with the residue of his strongest shag tobacco. I entered to find him hunched over the letters and telegram from Mrs. Vane, a magnifying glass in one hand and a chemical reagent in the other, his keen eyes darting across the documents with unyielding focus. "Good morning, Watson," he said. Without looking up, his voice crisp despite the evident fatigue. "I trust you slept well. We have much to do today." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot Mrs. Hudson had left, noting the untouched breakfast tray. "And what of you, Holmes? Have you unraveled the mystery in the night?" He set down the glass, his lips curving into a thin smile. "Not entirely, but the threads are beginning to weave themselves. Observe these letters. The typewriter is indeed a Remington No. 2, as I suspected. Note the slight misalignment of the E, which dips below the line, and the faint burr on the T. Such machines are common in offices, but this one has seen heavy use, suggesting a professional typist or a clerk. The paper is of standard quality, purchasable anywhere, but the ink tells a tale. It is a peculiar shade, with a hint of indigo, not the usual black, likely from a foreign manufacturer, perhaps German. I examined the letters as he indicated, though the subtleties escaped my untrained eye. "And the telegram? From Whitechapel, as you noted." "Precisely," Holmes replied, tapping the yellow slip. "Whitechapel is a district of contrast, poverty, and vice, rubbing shoulders with the remnants of old commerce. It is not a place Mrs. Vane or her late husband would venture without cause. The sender chose it deliberately to obscure his trail, but in doing so, he has left us a path to follow. We shall visit the telegraph office this morning. Dress warmly, Watson. The East End chills the bones as surely as the fog." Within the hour, we were in a four-wheeler, rattling through the awakening city. The streets grew narrower and more crowded as we approached Whitechapel, the elegant facades of Kensington giving way to the grim tenements and bustling markets of the East End. Vendors hawked their wares: hot eels, baked potatoes, second-hand closed, their cries mingling with the clatter of carts and the distant wail of a child. Holmes sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the passing scene, no doubt cataloguing details that might prove pertinent. The telegraph office was a modest establishment wedged between a pawnbroker's and a public house, its sign faded and its windows grimy. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of ink and paper, and a single clerk. A thin man with spectacles perched on a beak-like nose stood behind a cluttered counter. He looked up as we entered, his expression shifting from boredom to wariness. "Good day, gentlemen," he said, his voice nasal. "How may I assist you?" Holmes approached with his customary directness, producing the telegram. "This message was sent from your office yesterday afternoon. I wish to know who dispatched it." The clerk adjusted his spectacles, peering at the paper. "We handle dozens of telegrams daily, sir. Unless there's a name or some identifying mark, there is not." Holmes interrupted, his tone firm, but not unkind. "But perhaps you recall the sender. A man, I suspect, of middle height, dressed in a manner to blend with the crowd. Perhaps a Ulster coat, a low-brimmed hat. He paid in cash, small coins, and left quickly." The clerk's eyes widened slightly. "Now that you mention it, there was a fellow yesterday, around 4 o'clock. Kept his collar up, face half hidden, paid with a handful of coppers, and was gone before I could ask questions. Seemed nervous, like." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes intent. "Describe him further. Any distinguishing features? A scar, a limp, the color of his eyes?" The clerk shook his head. "Nothing like that. But wait, he had a ring, a signet ring, I think. When he handed over the form, I saw a smudge of red wax on the counter, like he'd been sealing letters or some sack." "Red wax," Holmes murmured, his gaze sharpening, "uncommon in these parts. And the form he filled out, do you keep copies?" "We do, for the records," the clerk replied, rummaging beneath the counter. He produced a ledger, flipping to the relevant page. "Here it is, handwriting's blocky, all capitals. No signature, of course." Holmes examined the entry, his magnifying glass in hand. "The pressure of the pen is uneven, written in haste, or perhaps with a trembling hand. The ink matches that of the telegram. Thank you, my good man. You have been most helpful." As we stepped outside, Holmes paused, his eyes scanning the street. "Red sealing wax, Watson. A habit of the upper classes, or those who ape them. Not something one finds in Whitechapel's back alleys. Our sender is no common thug. He has pretensions or connections to a higher sphere." "Do you think it Hargrave?" I asked, recalling the disgraced captain from Holmes's index. "Possibly," Holmes said, hailing a cab. "But we must not leap to conclusions. The wax is a thread. Let us see where it leads." Next, we visit Hampstead Heath, the site of Colonel Vane's accident. The police report was cursory, but the ground may yet hold secrets. The journey to Hampstead was a contrast to Whitechapel's squalor. The Heath's open expanse, dotted with trees and rolling hills, offered a respite from the city's clamour. We alighted near the western ridge, where Mrs. Vane had said her husband rode. The path was well-trodden, flanked by gorse and heather, and the air crisp with the scent of earth and grass. Holmes strode ahead, his eyes fixed on the ground. The colonel was thrown here. According to the report, his horse bolted. He struck his head on that stone yonder. He pointed to a jagged rock, half buried in the turf. I examined the spot, noting faint discolorations that might have been blood, weathered by rain. But what could have caused the horse to bolt? Vane was an experienced rider. Indeed, Holmes said, dropping to one knee. He scraped at the soil with a small trowel from his pocket, uncovering a thin wire stretched across the path, nearly invisible against the dirt. A tripwire, Watson. Cleverly placed, taut enough to startle a horse, but not to fell it outright. The Colonel's death was no accident, it was engineered. My blood chilled at the implication. Murder, then. But who laid the wire? Holmes coiled the wire, pocketing it. Someone familiar with the Colonel's habits. He rode the same path daily. It would be simple to lie in wait. Note the footprints here, boots, size 10, with a worn heel on the left. Our killer is left-footed, perhaps from an old injury. We searched further, finding a discarded cigarette end nearby, its paper embossed with a faint crest. Holmes examined it under his glass. Turkish tobacco, expensive, and the crests similar to the Punjab regiments. This ties back to Vane's military past. As we returned to the cab, Holmes's mind was already racing ahead. The wire, the wax, the crestal point to a man with a grudge from India. Hargrave fits, but we need more. I shall dispatch wires to my contacts in the War Office for details on Major Thorne and any others connected to the 1878 rebellion. Back at Baker Street, Holmes's energy was undiminished. He spread a map of London on the table, marking Whitechapel, Kensington, and Hampstead. The sender moves freely across the city, Watson. He is resourceful, perhaps with accomplices. We must consider the treasure mentioned in the journal gold, hidden during the rebellion. If Vane knew its location, others may seek it through his widow. I nodded, the pieces beginning to form a picture, and the button in the study, left by an intruder searching for clues. Precisely, Holmes said, lighting his pipe. Mrs. Vane is in danger not just from threats, but from those who would force the secret from her. We must protect her while we pursue the trail. That afternoon, Holmes received a reply from the war officer, telegram detailing Major Edmund Thorne's career. Now Sir Reginald Thorne, he resided in Mayfair, a respected figure in society. But the message hinted at rumors, financial troubles, a taste for gambling, and a falling out with Vane over unresolved matters from India. Thorne, Holmes mused. A man with motive if the treasure is involved. And Hargrave, disgraced, under Vane's command, may be his tool. The plot thickens, Watson. As evening fell, a boy from the Baker Street irregulars arrived with news. A man matching the clerk's description had been seen in Limehouse, entering an opium den. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The trail warms. Tomorrow, we venture into the shadows of the East End once more. The night passed with Holmes in deep contemplation, and I retired with a sense of foreboding. The mystery of the widow's telegram was unfolding into a tapestry of revenge and greed, its threads leading us into danger. Yet with Holmes leading, I felt a measure of confidence that the truth would prevail. Chapter 4. The Colonel's passed the revelations from Hampstead. Heath and the Whitechapel Telegraph Office had ignited a fire in Sherlock Holmes's eyes, a gleam that I had come to associate with the pursuit of a quarry whose scent grew ever stronger. As we returned to Baker Street that evening, the city's lamps flickering to life against the encroaching dusk, Holmes was already formulating his next moves, his mind a whirlwind of deductions and hypotheses. I, weary from the day's exertions, could scarcely keep pace with his rapid discourse on the implications of the tripwire and the Turkish cigarette end. Consider, Watson, he said, leaning back in the cab, his fingers drumming on the window ledge. The wire was no crude device. It was finely gauged, designed to startle rather than maim the horse outright, ensuring the rider's fall appeared accidental. The footprints suggest a man of military bearing. The stride is even, disciplined, despite the worn heel. And the cigarette, with its regimental crest, points unmistakably to a connection with the Punjab. We must delve deeper into Colonel Vane's history in India. The War Office telegram on Sir Reginald Thorne is intriguing, but incomplete. I shall require more detailed records. Upon our arrival at 2-1B, Mrs. Hudson greeted us with a tray of hot supper, her motherly concern evident as she noted Holmes's untouched breakfast. "You'll waste away, Mr. Holmes," she chided, but he waved her off with a distracted smile, retiring immediately to his desk, where he composed several telegrams. One was dispatched to a contact in the India office, another to Inspector Lestrade requesting surveillance on Mrs. Vane's residence, and a third to the Baker Street irregulars, summoning Wiggins for reconnaissance in Limehouse. As the boy arrived, tousle-haired and eager, Holmes briefed him succinctly. A man in an ulster coat, middle height, signet ring with red wax, seen in Limehouse opium dens. Find him, but do not approach. Report back by dawn. Wiggins nodded, pocketing the shilling Holmes tossed him, and vanished into the night. Holmes then turned to the Colonel's journal, poring over its faded entries by lamplight. "Listen to this, Watson," he said, reading aloud. "June 15th, 1878. The rebellion crushed, but at great cost. The rebel treasury seized gold ingots, jewels, worth a king's ransom, hidden in the caves of the Suleiman Range, coordinates known only to Thorne and myself. Hargrave suspects, but proof eludes him. Must guard against betrayal." I whistled softly. "So the treasure is real, and Hargrave knew of it even then." "Indeed," Holmes replied, closing the journal. "Hargrave's court-martial for embezzlement may have been a cover for deeper suspicions. If he believed Vane and Thorne had secreted the gold for themselves, his grudge would fester. And Thorne, now Sir Reginald, with his rumoured debts, you recall, might seek to claim it alone, eliminating Vane as the last barrier." "But why threaten the widow?" I asked. "If Vane confided in her, perhaps." Holmes shook his head. "Mrs. Vane knows nothing of the location, or she would have said. The threats are to flush her out, to force a revelation or a mistake. We must anticipate their next move." The night passed in fitful rest for me, while Holmes remained at his vigil, his pipe smoke curling like phantoms in the room. Dawn brought Wiggins, his face smudged but triumphant. "Found him, Governor. Tall bloke, scarred cheek, in the Blue Dragon Den. Goes by Roger, drinks with a red-haired woman." They whispered about the widow and the heath. Holmes's eyes flashed. "Excellent, Wiggins. Here's another shilling. Keep watch." As the boy departed, a telegram arrived from the India office, its contents detailed and illuminating. Colonel Rupert Vane had been a decorated officer, instrumental in quelling the 1878 Punjab uprising. Major Edmund Thorne, his superior, had recommended him for honours, but private correspondence hinted at tension. Thorne accused Vane of withholding information on the rebel treasure. Captain Roger Hargrave, quartermaster, was caught for falsifying accounts, but witnesses claimed he had uncovered discrepancies in the treasure's inventory. Released in 1885, Hargrave dropped from sight. Rumoured to have turned to mercenary work in Africa, mercenary, Holmes mused, a man hardened by exile, skilled in deception. The scarred cheek, Wiggins, mentioned perhaps from a duel or battle. And the red-haired woman an accomplice. We must identify her. Our next step took us to the British Museum's reading room, where Holmes consulted archives on the Punjab Rebellion. Amidst the hushed whispers of scholars and the rustle of pages, he uncovered a faded photograph of Vane's regiment, Vane stern and mustachioed, Thorn portly with a commanding gaze, Hargrave lean and sharp-featured. But a name in the caption caught my eye, Clara Morton, listed as a nurse attached to the unit. A woman in the regiment, I queried. Holmes nodded. Nurses often accompanied campaigns. Perhaps our auburn-haired companion from Limehouse. Further inquiries at the Army Medical Service revealed Miss Clara Morton had served in India. Returning to England in 1880, she now resided in Bloomsbury, employed as a governess. Holmes's deduction was swift. She may have been close to Vane or Hargrave. A romantic entanglement. Jealousy could fuel the plot. We proceeded to Bloomsbury, the streets alive with students and clerks. Miss Morton's boarding house was modest, its landlady a stout woman with a suspicious eye. Miss Morton, she's out teaching, but back by 5. Who's asking? Holmes presented a card, claiming official business. Allowed to wait in the parlor, he examined the room subtly. A typewriter on a desk caught his attention. Remington? No. 2, he whispered. Note the misaligned E on the label she's typing. When Miss Morton arrived, she was a striking woman of her auburn hair pinned neatly, her green eyes wary. Gentlemen, Mrs. Potts said you wished to see me. Holmes wasted no time. We are investigating the death of Colonel Rupert Vane. You knew him in India. Her face paled, but she composed herself. Yes, as a nurse. He was kind to me during the rebellion. I was saddened by his passing. And Captain Hargrave? Holmes pressed. A flicker of emotion crossed her features. Roger, we were engaged once. But after his disgrace, he left. I've not seen him since. Holmes produced one of the threatening letters. This was typed on your machine, Miss Morton. The faults match. She gasped, her hands trembling. I typed letters for a gentleman who lodged here briefly. He said they were business correspondence. I had no idea, ... double quotes, the gentleman's name. Holmes demanded. Mr. Reginald Smith. But he left last week. Tall, scarred, used red wax for his seals. Hargrave, under alias. Holmes nodded. You must come with us, Miss Morton. Your life may be in danger if Hargrave suspects you've spoken. Reluctantly, she agreed, and we escorted her to Baker Street, where Holmes arranged for her safety. With Mrs. Hudson, you are a pawn in this, Miss Morton, he said gently. Hargrave uses your affection. Tell us everything. Over tea, she revealed her story. In India, she had loved Hargrave, but Vane had warned her of his corruption. After Hargrave's court-martial, she broke the engagement, unknowingly fueling his hatred. Recently, Hargrave had reappeared, claiming innocence and seeking her help to expose Vane's theft of the treasure. She typed the letters at his behest, believing them harmless warnings. But the telegram? Holmes asked. I know nothing of that, she insisted. Roger mentioned a partner, a sir who pulled strings. Sir Reginald Thorne. The pieces fit. Holmes dispatched Lestrade to arrest Hargrave at the Blue Dragon, but the raid found the den empty. Hargrave had fled as night fell. A urgent knock brought Mrs. Vane, her face ashen. Mr. Holmes. Another telegram. It read, Reveal the caves or die. The Suleiman Caves, Holmes said. They know of the journal. Someone has searched your study again. The Colonel's past was unraveling, revealing a web of betrayal, spanning continents. Hargrave, Thorn, Morton each, bound by love, greed, or vengeance. But a twist loomed, one that would challenge even Holmes's acumen. Chapter 5. The auburn-haired woman. The web of intrigue surrounding Colonel Vane's death had grown more tangled with each revelation. And as Sherlock Holmes and I sat in our Baker Street lodgings on the morning after Miss Clara Morton's startling confessions, the air was charged with anticipation. Holmes, his lean frame draped in his dressing gown, paced the room with measured steps, his pipe clenched between his teeth, sending curls of blue smoke toward the ceiling. The journal from Vane's study lay open on the table, its pages annotated, in Holmes's precise hand, while the threatening letters and telegrams formed a grim mosaic beside it. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said, pausing to tap the journal with his pipe stem. "The caves of the Suleiman range Vane's hiding place for the rebel gold. Hargrave, with his mercenary background, would know the terrain well. But why the telegram demanding revelation of the caves? If Hargrave believes Mrs. Vane holds the secret, he is mistaken. She knows nothing. This suggests desperation or a ploy to draw her out." Miss Morton, who had spent the night under Mrs. Hudson's watchful eye, entered the room, her auburn hair neatly coiled, though her green eyes betrayed lingering fear. "Mr. Holmes, I've recalled something more," she said, her voice steady, but low. "Roger Hargrave mentioned a meeting at the docks near Wapping. He said his partner would provide funds for a journey abroad. I thought it was for us to start anew, but now... Holmes's eyes sharpened. "When was this meeting?" "Tonight, at 8, by the old warehouse on Shadwell Basin." "Excellent," Holmes replied, a glint of satisfaction in his gaze. "We shall be there. In the meantime, Miss Morton, remain here. Safety lies in seclusion." I protested the risk, but Holmes was adamant. "The net tightens, Watson. Hargrave is the key. Capture him, and Thorn's involvement unravels." We spent the afternoon in preparation, Holmes, disguising himself as a dock labourer, his features smudged with coal dust, his coat tattered. I, less adept at such arts, accompanied him as a medical inspector, a role that allowed me to carry my service revolver unobtrusively. The docks at Wapping were a labyrinth of shadows as evening fell, the Thames murmuring against the pilings, the air thick with the scent of tar and salt. Warehouses loomed like silent sentinels, their windows dark, and the occasional cry of a gull pierced the hush. We positioned ourselves behind a stack of crates near the Shadwell Basin, the water lapping gently below. At precisely 8, a figure emerged from the fog, a tall man, his cheeks scarred, his gait purposeful yet cautious. Hargrave. He paused by the warehouse door, lighting a cigarette, the same Turkish blend we had found on the heath. Moments later, another man approached, cloaked and hatted, his voice cultured as he greeted Hargrave. "You have the journal." Hargrave shook his head. "The widow's house is watched, but Clara typed the letters. She can be persuaded. The cloaked man, Sir Reginald Thorn, by his bearing, snarled fool. The coordinates are in the journal. Without them, the gold is lost. Deal with the widow tonight." As they turned to leave, Holmes sprang forward, his voice ringing out. "Not so fast, gentlemen. Sherlock Holmes, at your service." Hargrave whirled, drawing a pistol, but I fired. A warning shot, the report echoing across the basin. Thorn bolted into the shadows, but Hargrave lunged at Holmes, the two grappling fiercely. With a swift blow, Holmes disarmed him, pinning him against the warehouse wall. Lestrade, Holmes called, and the inspector emerged from hiding with 2 constables, cuffs at the ready. Hargrave, breathing heavily, glared defiance. "You know nothing, Holmes. The gold is mine, by right veins stole it, framed me." Thorne, captured nearby, maintained a haughty silence, but under questioning at Scotland Yard, the truth emerged piecemeal. Thorne had learned of the treasures. Location from Vane years ago, but needed the exact coordinates, which Vane had altered in his journal as a safeguard. Hargrave, recruited through old regimental ties, had laid the tripwire on the heath, staging the accident. The letters and telegrams were to terrorize Mrs. Vane into revealing any hidden clues. But Miss Morton's role added a layer of complexity. "Clara was my weakness," Hargrave admitted. "She believed in my innocence, typed the letters blindly, but Thorne promised her a share if I succeeded." Holmes, however, sensed inconsistencies. "Why the red wax, Hargrave? A signet ring yours or Thorne's?" Hargrave smirked. "Neither. It was Clara's idea, old habit from India, to seal our love letters." A twist dawned on me. Miss Morton, the auburn-haired woman, was no mere pawn. Returning to Baker Street, we found her gone, a note left. "Forgive me. The gold calls." C.M. Holmes's laugh was mirthless. She played us all. In India, she nursed Vane, learned of the treasure, jilted Hargrave to pursue it. She typed the letters, sent the telegram. From Whitechapel, disguised and manipulated Hargrave and Thorne. Telegrams to ports confirmed. Miss Morton had boarded a steamer for Bombay. Coordinates from the journal stolen during her stay in hand. "The auburn-haired woman escapes," Holmes said, "but justice may yet find her in the Suleiman caves." The case closed with arrests, but the widow's last telegram lingered, a plea that unveiled greed's endless depths. Chapter 6. The Trap. The departure of Miss Clara Morton. The auburn-haired woman who had so deftly manipulated both Roger Hargrave and Sir Reginald Thorne cast a new shadow over the investigation into Colonel Vane's murder. The fog of deceit that had enveloped the case seemed to thicken, yet Sherlock Holmes, with his unerring instinct for truth, appeared invigorated by this unexpected twist. As we sat in our Baker Street lodgings on the morning following the confrontation at Shadwell Basin, the room was a scene of ordered chaos, maps of London and India spread across the table. The Colonel's journal open to a dog-eared page, and Holmes's pipe sending tendrils of smoke toward the ceiling, mingling with the faint light filtering through the window. Holmes stood by the mantel, his lean frame taut with purpose, his eyes gleaming with that intensity which betokened a mind fully engaged. "Watson," he said, tapping the journal with a long finger, "Miss Morton's flight to Bombay confirms her as the linchpin of this affair. She has the coordinates of the Suleiman caves, stolen from this very journal during her brief stay here. But her escape is not the end, it is a challenge. She believes herself beyond our reach, yet London remains the stage where this drama must conclude." I frowned, stirring my coffee. "But Holmes, if she's bound for India, how can we pursue her? And what of Mrs. Vane?" The telegrams continue. "To threaten her life." Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. "Precisely, Watson. The telegrams are our lever. Miss Morton may have orchestrated the earlier messages, but the latest demanding the cave's location came after her departure. Someone else, perhaps an accomplice left behind, still seeks to terrorize Mrs. Vane. We shall use this to draw them out." He outlined a plan with characteristic precision. "We shall announce a memorial service for Colonel Vane, to be held tomorrow at St. Mary's Church in Kensington. The notice will appear in the Times, worded to suggest Mrs. Vane will attend, laden with grief and perhaps ready to divulge secrets in her vulnerability. The conspirators, believing the journal's loss has left her defenseless, will come to observe her act. We shall be waiting. I marveled at the audacity of the scheme. But what if they strike at her before the service? Holmes nodded, anticipating my concern. Mrs. Vane is under Lestrade's protection at a safe house as we speak. Her movements concealed. The notice will be a lure, nothing more. We need only one of the conspirators to show themselves, and the trail to Miss Morton's confederates will open. By midday, Holmes had dispatched a notice to the Times, worded with careful ambiguity. A memorial service for the late Colonel Rupert Vane will be held at St. Mary's Church, Kensington, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Mrs. Eleanor Vane requests the presence of all who knew her husband to honor his memory. Simultaneously, he wired Inspector Lestrade, ensuring plainclothes officers would patrol the church grounds, while the Baker Street irregulars were tasked with watching the surrounding streets for any suspicious figures. That afternoon, we visited St. Mary's to prepare our vantage point. The church, a Gothic structure with stained glass windows and a towering spire, stood at the heart of Kensington, its pews polished and its air heavy with the scent of wax and old hymnals. Holmes selected a concealed spot in the organ loft, accessible by a narrow stair behind the vestry, offering a clear view of the nave and the entrance. "Here, Watson," he said, testing the sight lines. "We shall see without being seen. Bring your revolver. We may need it." As we left the church, a chill wind swept through the churchyard, rustling the yew trees. I could not shake a sense of foreboding. "Holmes, are we certain this will draw them out? If Miss Morton was the mastermind, her accomplices may scatter." Holmes's eyes narrowed. Miss Morton was cunning, but not infallible. She relied on Hargrave's muscle and Thorne's influence, yet someone sent that final telegram. There is a fourth player, Watson, one who knows the journal's contents and believes Mrs. Vane holds the key. This service will force their hand. The following day, we arrived at St. Mary's well before the appointed hour, slipping into the organ loft unseen. The church filled gradually mourners in black, a few military men with medals gleaming, and curious locals drawn by the notice. Mrs. Vane, under heavy disguise and guarded by Lestrade's men, sat in a pew near the front, her face veiled to conceal her identity. Holmes, peering through a small brass telescope, scanned the congregation with meticulous care. "There," he whispered, pointing to a tall figure lingering near the rear, his face half hidden by a scarf. Hargrave's build, but the scarf suggests caution. And there by the pillar a woman with auburn hair. I followed his gaze, my heart quickening. "Miss Morton, has she returned?" Holmes shook his head. "A decoy, perhaps, or another accomplice. Her hair is dyed. Note the uneven tint at the roots. But observe the man in the side aisle, cloaked, moving toward the vestry door." The figure was slight, his movements swift and furtive. As the service began, with the vicar's voice intoning a prayer, the cloaked man slipped through the door. Holmes signaled me to follow, and we descended the loft stair silently, emerging into the vestry's dim light. The man was rifling through a stack of hymnals, as if searching for something hidden. "Hold, sir," Holmes called, his voice sharp. The man spun, revealing a young face barely 25, with sharp blue eyes and a naval uniform beneath his cloak. "Who are you?" he demanded, his hand darting to his pocket. "Sherlock Holmes. And this is Dr. Watson. You are Lieutenant James Vane, the Colonel's nephew, are you not?" The young man froze, his hand dropping. "How did you know? Your resemblance to your uncle is striking," Holmes said, stepping closer. "But your presence here, searching the vestry during a memorial, suggests more than familial grief. Explain yourself." Lieutenant Vane hesitated, then sighed. "I came to find my uncle's prayer book. He told me it held a clue to his work. In India's something about caves. I overheard my aunt's fears and read of the service. I meant no harm." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "And your connection to the telegrams? Or Miss Morton?" Vane's eyes widened. "Miss Morton, I know. No such woman. I received a note yesterday, unsigned, urging me to search the church. It mentioned the caves." Holmes produced the note from Vane's paquita, scrap of paper, typed, with the familiar misaligned E. "This is from Miss Morton's typewriter," he said. "You are being used, Lieutenant, as Hargrave and Thorne were. Come with us." We escorted Vane to a nearby inn, where Holmes interrogated him further. The lieutenant, stationed at Portsmouth, had idolized his uncle but knew little of his Indian past. The note had come by post, luring him to London with promises of family secrets. Holmes, satisfied of his innocence but wary, sent him to Lestrade for safekeeping. As we returned to Baker Street, Holmes was silent, his mind turning over the new piece. "Miss Morton, or her agent, continues to pull strings," he said at last. "The trap succeeded, but not as we expected. The lieutenant's presence suggests a deeper game. Someone seeks to muddy the waters, to distract us from the true prize." That night, a telegram from Lestrade confirmed Hargrave's escape from custody during transfer, aided by an unknown accomplice. The trail to the Suleiman gold grew colder, yet Holmes's resolve burned brighter. "The net closes, Watson," he said, staring into the fire. "Tomorrow, we pursue the typewriter's origin. Miss Morton's shadow looms large, but we shall find her, or those she left behind. The memorial had been a trap, but not ours alone. The unseen hand behind the telegrams had set a snare of their own, and the game was far from over." Chapter 7. The Unexpected Alitha. Events at St. Mary's Church had introduced an unforeseen element into the labyrinthine case of the widow's telegram, with Lieutenant James Vane's appearance adding a fresh layer of complexity to the already intricate web of deceit. As Sherlock Holmes and I made our way back to Baker Street through the twilight streets of Kensington, the young naval officer walked between us, his uniform crisp but his expression one of bewildered anxiety. Holmes, ever the master of silence when deep in thought, said little during the journey, his sharp features set in a mask of contemplation, while I endeavored to reassure the lieutenant that his involvement, though suspicious, might yet prove innocent. Upon reaching our lodgings, Mrs. Hudson, sensing the gravity of the occasion, prepared a pot of strong tea and withdrew discreetly. We settled in the sitting room, the fire crackling merrily against the chill evening air, and Holmes fixed his piercing gaze upon Lieutenant Vane. "Now, sir," he said, steepling his fingers, "tell us everything your relation to Colonel Vane, your reasons for coming to London, and the exact contents of the note that lured you to the church." The lieutenant, a handsome young man with the clear blue eyes and firm jaw of his uncle, leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "Colonel Vane was my uncle, my father's brother. He raised me after my parents died in a carriage accident. When I was a boy, I owe him everything, my education, my commission in the Navy. When I heard of his death, I was at sea, But upon docking at Portsmouth, I learned from letters that Aunt Eleanor suspected foul play. I took leave immediately and came to London, arriving only yesterday. I intended to visit her at Larkspur Road, but the house was dark and no one answered. Then, this morning, a note was slipped under my door at the inn. He produced the crumpled paper, which Holmes examined closely. Typed, as expected, Holmes murmured. The same machine misaligned E, Burr, on the T. Continue, Lieutenant. The note said Uncle Rupert had hidden a family heirloom in his prayer book at St. Mary's, something to do with caves in India. It urged me to retrieve it during the memorial, lest it fall into wrong hands. I thought it a clue to his death. Perhaps a will or document. I meant no harm. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And you have no knowledge of Miss Clara Morton, Roger Hargrave, or Sir Reginald Thorne? Vane shook his head emphatically. None. I've been at sea for months' patrols in the Mediterranean. My uncle mentioned India in passing, stories of campaigns, but nothing of treasures or betrayals. Satisfied for the moment, Holmes leaned back. Your story rings true, Lieutenant, but the timing is suspect. Someone used you to probe the church, perhaps believing Vane left clues there. Stay in London. Your insights into your uncle's character may prove invaluable, but trust no one. Further notes or visitors must be reported to me at once. Vane nodded gratefully. I wish to help clear my uncle's name and protect my aunt. Command me as you will. As the lieutenant departed, escorted by one of Lestrade's men for safety, I turned to Holmes. An unexpected ally, indeed. Do you believe him? Holmes lit his pipe, exhaling a thoughtful cloud. His sincerity appears genuine, Watson. The Navy has instilled discipline, and his grief is unfeigned. Yet coincidences in such cases are rare. We must verify his alibi wires to Portsmouth. We'll confirm his ship's log. The following morning brought replies. Lieutenant Vane's account matched the naval records. He had indeed been at sea until recently. Holmes, armed with this assurance, summoned Vane back to Baker Street. Lieutenant, he said, describe your uncle's habits in detail, his correspondences, visitors, any mentions of India in recent years. Vane pondered. Uncle was reserved, but he received letters from old comrades occasionally. One name stands out, Thorne, Sir Reginald now. They corresponded about regimental matters. And there was a woman, years ago, a nurse. From India, Uncle spoke of her fondly once, but Aunt Eleanor disliked the topic. Clara Morton, Holmes interjected. Your uncle's affection for her may have been more than platonic. Vane's eyes widened. That explains Aunt's jealousy, but murder over old flames. Not flames, Lieutenant Gold. The treasure your uncle hid. Miss Morton seeks it, using others as pawns. Your note was her doing, or an accomplice's, to stir chaos. Vane's face hardened. Then let me aid you. I know my uncle's club, the United Services. He kept a locker there. Perhaps clues remain. Holmes agreed, and we set off for the club in Pall Mall, a bastion of military men with its leather chairs and walls adorned with battle prints. The steward, recognizing Vane, allowed access to the colonel's locker, small compartment containing cigars, a flask, and a sealed envelope addressed to James. Vane opened it, reading aloud. My dear nephew, if you read this, I am gone. Beware the shadows of the Punjab. Thorne covets what we hid. Hargrave hates for what he lost, and Clara, ... She tempts with memories. The cave's secret dies with me, for the gold is cursed. Protect Eleanor. Holmes seized the letter. Posted recently by the ink. Your uncle anticipated danger. This confirms the trio's involvement, but Clara, as the temptress, she manipulated all. Vane's resolve strengthened. I'll confront Thorn. As family, he may speak to me. Holmes cautioned against it, but Vane insisted, agreeing to. Where a wire, a device, Holmes had procured from a tinkerer friend. To eavesdrop. That evening, Vane visited Thorn's Mayfair residence, while Holmes and I listened from a nearby carriage via the primitive apparatus. Thorn's voice crackled. Young Vane, condolences. Your uncle was a fine man. Was it you, Sir Reginald? Vane pressed. The treasure did you kill for it? Thorn's denial was vehement, but a slip followed. Hargraves, the villain, and that nurse Clara. She came to me months ago, claiming Vane hoarded the gold. I refused her scheme, but she persists. As Vane departed, a shot rang out. In the street, we rushed forward, finding Vane wounded but alive, Hargrave fleeing into the night. He waited outside. Vane gasped. Thorn lied, he's in league. Holmes examined the scene, finding a dropped handkerchief monogrammed CM Miss Morton's touch. He said, but from afar, Hargrave acts for her. Vane, bandaged by my hand, proved his loyalty in the fray, shielding a bystander. An ally, indeed, Holmes conceded. Your bravery earns trust. Together, we end this. The unexpected ally had faced fire, unveiling Thorn's duplicity and Hargrave's desperation. Yet the telegram's sender lurked, and the twist deepened. Was Vane truly innocent, or a deeper player in the game of gold and greed? Chapter 8. The warehouse ambush. The alliance with Lieutenant James Vane had proven fortuitous. His naval discipline and familial insights, lending a new dimension to our pursuit of the shadowy figures behind Colonel Vane's murder. As the evening shadows lengthened over Baker Street on the day following the attack in Mayfair, Sherlock Holmes sat by the fire, his violin tucked under his chin, drawing forth a melancholy air that mirrored the complexity of the case. The handkerchief monogrammed CM, dropped during Hargrave's ambush, lay on the table, a tangible link to the elusive Clara Morton, now en route to India aboard a steamer. Lieutenant Vane, his shoulder bandaged from the graze of Hargrave's bullet, paced the room with restrained energy. Mr. Holmes, he said, pausing to gaze out the window at the gaslit street, Thorn's denial rings false. His eyes betrayed him when I mentioned the treasure, and Hargrave's shot it was meant to silence me before I could reveal more. Holmes set down his violin, his gaze sharp. Indeed, Lieutenant. Thorn is entangled, but not the architect. Miss Morton pulls the strings from afar, yet someone in London executes her will. The handkerchief is a deliberate plant, meant to direct suspicion toward her, while the true culprit operates unchecked. We must strike at the heart. The warehouse in Wapping, where Hargrave met Thorn. Lestrade has agreed to a raid tonight. I expressed concern for Vane's wound, but he brushed it aside. A scratch, Doctor. I've weathered worse in storms at sea. Let me join you. My uncle's honor demands it. Holmes consented, valuing the lieutenant's resolve. We departed. Under cover of dusk, Holmes in his labourer's disguise, Vane and I in dark overcoats, blending with the evening crowds. The Thames district was alive with the clamour of sailors and merchants, the air thick with fog rolling off the river, carrying the scent of pitch and brine. The warehouse, a dilapidated structure of weathered brick and rusted iron, squatted by. The Shadwell Basin, its doors padlocked but its windows shattered. Lestrade met us in the shadows, his burly form accompanied by 4 constables, lanterns hooded. "Holmes," he whispered gruffly. "Your wire said urgent. What's afoot here?" "A nexus of conspiracy," Holmes replied. "Hargrave and Thorne conferred within. Break the lock quietly. Surprise is our weapon." A constable applied a jimmy, the padlock yielding with a muffled snap. We slipped inside, the interior a cavern of crates and barrels, dust motes dancing in the faint moonlight filtering through cracks. The air was stale, laced with the odor of mold and old rope. Holmes's lantern swept the floor, revealing scuffed footprints and a discarded cigarette butt Turkish as before. "Search thoroughly," Holmes directed. "Documents, weapons, anything tying to India or the Punjab." We found out, Vane and I examining a stack of crates marked for export to Bombay, while Lestrade's men probed the shadows. Suddenly, a constable's cry echoed. Here, a trapdoor. Beneath a tarp, a wooden hatch led to a cellar. Holmes descended first, his light illuminating a makeshift office, a table strewn with maps of the Suleiman Range, typed letters matching those sent to Vane, and a telegraph key wired illicitly, but the room was empty of occupants. "They've fled," Lestrade growled. "Tipped off, perhaps." Holmes knelt, spotting a torn scrap of paper wedged under the table leg. He retrieved it, holding it to the lighter fragment bearing the embossed crest of the Punjab regiment, with scrawled words, ... caves at 34N, meet at ... The coordinates, partial Holmes said, pocketing it. "This ties directly to the treasure, but why leave it? Allure or oversight in haste?" Vane's face lit with recognition. The family legend uncle spoke of it once. Gold looted from rebels, hidden to fund loyal troops. He and Thorne buried it in the caves, but Hargrave accused them of theft. Could this be what they seek? Holmes nodded, his mind racing. "Precisely. Lieutenant, the gold's value today would be immense, motive enough for murder. Miss Morton, spurned lover and opportunist, learned of it in India. She ensnares Hargrave with revenge, Thorne with greed, but there is a third mastermind coordinating from the shadows." As we ascended, a sudden crash resounded, the warehouse door slamming shut, followed by the scrape of a bar locking it. "Ambush," Lestrade shouted. Dark figures materialized from the rafters, ropes dropping as assailants swung down 3 men, masked, armed with cudgels and knives. Hargrave led them, his scarred cheek twisting in a sneer. "Holmes, you meddle. Too far." Chaos erupted. I drew my revolver, firing at a lunging thug, the shot echoing as he fell, clutching his leg. Vane, despite his wound, grappled another, his naval training evident in a swift disarmament. Lestrade's constables swung lanterns as weapons, shattering. One against an attacker's head. Holmes, agile as a cat, dodged Hargrave's knife, countering with a precise Baritsu hold that sent the captain sprawling. "Yield, Hargrave. Your game ends." But Hargrave laughed, rolling free. "Not yet. The gold is ours. The mastermind decrees it." A constable unlocked the door, but outside, more shadows, waited a cloaked figure, directing reinforcements. "Thorne, no." The voice was younger, commanding. "Take them alive. The lieutenant knows more." Vane charged, recognizing the tone. "Cousin Edmund, Thorne's son." The cloaked man Edmund Thorne, Jr. fled into the fog, his men covering retreat with thrown crates that splintered around us. Hargrave cornered, fought fiercely, but was subdued by Lestrade's cuffs. In the aftermath, As constables carted off the wounded thugs, Holmes examined Hargrave. Who is the mastermind? Not Miss Morton sees at sea. Hargrave spat. Young Thorne. He discovered his father's letters, allied with Clara years ago. They planned Vane's death. I was the tool. Vane, breathless, confirmed. Edmund. Visited uncle occasionally, prying about India. I thought it familial interest. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The third player, Edmund Thorne, inheriting greed. He sent the last telegram, using the warehouse telegraph. Miss Morton sails for the gold, but Edmund holds the full coordinates. We raced to Mayfair, but Sir Reginald's house was ablaze, papers burning. Edmund had fled, likely to join Morton. The ambush failed, but the chase continues, Holmes said. Lieutenant, your legend proved key. To India, perhaps. But Vane shook his head. The gold's curse ends here. Let them chase phantoms. The warehouse revealed the mastermind, twisting the tale, a new family betrayal, deeper than suspected. Chapter 9. The Widow's Secret. The ambush at the Wapping warehouse had illuminated the shadowy contours of the conspiracy, revealing young Edmund Thorne as a pivotal figure whose ambitions extended beyond mere inheritance to the cursed allure of the Punjab treasure. As dawn broke over London the morning after, casting a pallid light through the windows of Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves in consultation with Lieutenant James Vane and Inspector Lestrade, the latter nursing a bruise from the nocturnal fray, but otherwise undeterred. The warehouse had yielded partial coordinates to the Suleiman Caves, but the full secret eluded us, as did Edmund Thorne, who had vanished into the city's underbelly like a spectre. Holmes, his eyes alight with the fire of pursuit, spread the torn scrap across the table. This fragment is deliberate. Watson, a breadcrumb meant to mislead or provoke. Young Thorne knows the complete location. His alliance with Miss Morton suggests a plan to claim the gold upon her arrival in India. But the telegrams persist, targeting Mrs. Vane. Why, unless she holds a piece they lack? Lestrade grunted, rubbing his jaw. We've Hargrave in irons, singing like a canary. Says young Thorne recruited him months ago, promising a share. The tripwire on the heath was his handiwork, but the orders came from above. As for Sir Reginald, he's under guard at home, denying all but crumbling under pressure. Vane, his shoulders stiff, but his spirit unbroken, leaned forward. My aunt must be informed. She's in hiding, but if she knows something of the treasure, it could endanger her further. Holmes nodded decisively. Precisely, Lieutenant. We return to Mrs. Vane. She has withheld details, perhaps out of fear or loyalty. The time for secrets is past. We set out for the safe house in Chelsea, a modest terrace under discreet police watch, where Mrs. Eleanor Vane had been sequestered. The fog had lifted, but a chill wind whispered through the streets, carrying the distant toll of church bells. Mrs. Vane received us in a small parlour, her face drawn and pale, her morning dress accentuating the shadows under her eyes. Mr. Holmes, gentlemen, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Have you news? The threats, they haunt my dreams. Holmes took a seat opposite her, his gaze penetrating yet compassionate. Madame, we have unravelled much the roles of Hargrave, Thorne, and Miss Morton in your husband's murder. The treasure from the Punjab is the motive, hidden in the Suleiman Caves. But the conspirators believe you possess knowledge of its precise location. Tell us the truth, Mrs. Vane. What did your husband confide? She hesitated, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. I swore secrecy. Rupert said it was for our protection. The gold was not stolen. You see, was safeguarded from rebels. meant for the crown, but Thorne pressured him to claim it privately, and Hargrave accused them of theft. Rupert altered the coordinates in his journal, committing the true ones to memory. On his deathbed before the accident, he whispered them to me, begging I never revealed them. A hush fell over the room. Holmes leaned forward. "And have you, madam, to anyone?" She shook her head vehemently. "No, but there was a night, weeks ago, when I felt watched. A figure at the window. And James, my nephew, he visited shortly before, asking about Uncle's stories from India. I thought it innocent curiosity." Vane's face flushed. "Aunt Eleanor, I asked only to honor his memory. I knew nothing of this." Holmes's expression grew grim. "Mrs. Vane, your husband's death was engineered to extract this secret. You are the final guardian. The telegrams are probes, testing your resolve. We must draw the sender out, perhaps young Edmund Thorne, Sir Reginald's son, who has emerged as a key player." Mrs. Vane's eyes widened in shock. "Edmund. He dined with us often, charming but insistent on old tales." "Could he? Greed corrupts," Madame Holmes replied. "We shall confront him, but first you must leave London. Lestrade will arrange passage to the countryside, under guard. Reveal the coordinates to no one, not even us, unless peril demands it." As we prepared her departure, a constable burst in, breathless. "Inspector, a telegram for Mrs. Vane, intercepted at Larkspur Road." Lestrade unfolded it. "The cave's call, speak or perish. E. E for Edmund," Holmes mused. "He grows bold. Lieutenant, accompany your aunt to safety. Watson and I will visit Sir Reginald. Once more his son's flight may loosen his tongue." We parted ways, Vane escorting Mrs. Vane in a closed carriage, while Holmes and I hailed a hansom for Mayfair. Sir Reginald Thorne's residence, still bearing scorch marks from the fire, was fortified with police. The baronet, aged and haggard, received us in his study, his hands trembling as he poured brandy. "Holmes," he croaked, "my son Edmund, he's lost to this madness. I learned too late of his pact with that which Clara. She seduced him with tales of wealth, using my old letters to Vane. I tried to stop them, but Hargrave, he threatened exposure." Holmes's voice was steel. "The coordinates, Sir Reginald, you know them." Thorne shook his head. "Vane changed them, distrusting me. Only he and, perhaps, Eleanor knew the truth. Edmund believes she holds the key. He's desperate, shipping arms to India for the dig. Arms." I interjected. "To secure the caves from locals," Thorne replied. "He sails tomorrow on the Aurora, bound for Bombay." Holmes rose abruptly. "Then we intercept him at the docks. Lestrade, rally your men." The docks at Tilbury were a hive of activity as night fell. Cranes groaning under cargo, sailors shouting amid the tangle of rigging. We concealed ourselves near the Aurora, a steamer belching smoke, its decks laden with crates. Edmund Thorne appeared, cloaked, directing porters with a crate-marked mining tools, likely the arms. As he boarded, Holmes signaled. Now we surged forward, but Thorne spotted us, drawing a pistol. Shots rang out, splintering wood. Vane, arriving unexpectedly, tackled a henchman while I covered Holmes. In the melee, Thorne slipped overboard, splashing into the Thames. Divers recovered no body, but a sodden note floated up. "The widow's secret dies with me. Curses on the gold." Holmes frowned. "A feint or suicide?" "No, Thorne lives." "This is misdirection." Back at Baker Street, a wire from Vane. "Mrs. Vane safe. but whispering in sleep of 34 North, star-marked cave. The secret leaked, perhaps overheard. The twist, had Vane betrayed his aunt, or was another ear listening? Holmes's face darkened. The conspirators close in. We must protect the widow and uncover the traitor within. The widow's secret, once buried, now threatened to unearth doom for all. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. The Revelation of Mrs. Eleanor. Vane's whispered secret in her sleep had cast a pall of suspicion over our small circle of allies, suggesting that the walls of even the safest havens might have ears attuned to the whispers of greed. As Sherlock Holmes and I returned to Baker Street from the chaotic scene at Tilbury Docks, where young Edmund Thorne had seemingly plunged into the Thames, the city's night lights flickered like distant stars against the inky sky, a mocking reminder of the elusive coordinates to the Suleiman Caves. Holmes, his brow furrowed in deep cogitation, spoke little during the cab ride, his fingers drumming an irregular tattoo on the windowsill, while I pondered the implications of the widow's inadvertent disclosure. 34 North, star-marked cave. Holmes murmured as we ascended the stairs to 2-1B. A fragment, Watson, but enough to ignite pursuit. If overheard by Vane or a spy, it propels the conspirators toward India. Yet Edmund's suicide note smells of theatrics, a body unrecovered. Is a man unbound? Mrs. Hudson greeted us with concern, bearing a tray of sandwiches and tea. But Holmes waved her away, retiring to his chemical corner where he busied himself with a reagent test on the sodden note from the river. Ink soluble in water, but this residue parchment treated with a preservative. Forged in advance, tossed as diversion. Thorne lives, plotting his next move. A knock at the door heralded Lieutenant Vane's arrival. His face flushed from haste, his bandaged shoulder straining against his coat. Mr. Holmes, Aunt Eleanor is secure in Surrey, under guard. But she's distraught claims she spoke in sleep, fearing betrayal. I swear, I heard nothing untoward. My room was adjacent, but I slept soundly. Holmes fixed him with a penetrating stare. Lieutenant, your loyalty is commendable, yet circumstances demand scrutiny. Remain here, we may need your testimony. The night passed in vigilant wakefulness, Holmes poring over maps of India, tracing latitudes near 34 North, while I dozed fitfully in my chair. Dawn brought a telegram from Lestrade. Hargrave, in custody, demanded to speak only to Holmes, promising revelations in exchange for leniency. We hastened to Scotland Yard, where Hargrave sat in a dimly lit cell, his scarred face haggard, chains clinking as he shifted. Holmes, he rasped, you've cornered me, but I'm no murderer. The letters, the telegram, my doing, to frighten the widow into spilling the caves. But the heath, the tripwire, not my hand. Holmes leaned against the bars, his voice calm. Then whose? Hargrave. Speak plain. Hargrave's eyes darted, sweat beating on his brow. Sir Reginald Thorne. He commanded it. All gold fever gripped him years ago. I was his tool, promised to cut. But young Edmund Hees, the viper, allying with Clara to cut out the old man. Evidence? Holmes demanded. A letter, Hargrave muttered, producing a crumpled missive from his boot. From Thorne Sr., detailing the plan. He used red wax, his signet, the lion rampant. Holmes examined the paper, nodding. The cultured voice. In the warehouse, the regimental crest, it aligns. But why confess now? Hargrave smirked bitterly. Edmund tried to silence me in custody, a bribed guard with poison. I fight for my neck. Lestrade, overhearing, ordered Hargrave's transfer to a secure wing, while Holmes pocketed the letter. To Mayfair, Watson. Sir Reginald must face the noose of his own words. Sir Reginald Thorne's residence, still acrid from the fire, loomed under grey skies. A butler admitted us reluctantly, leading to the study where the baronet sat by a dying fire, his face ashen, a decanter half empty at his elbow. "Holmes," he said wearily, "you return like a hound on the scent. My son, any word?" "Edmund lives," Holmes stated flatly, producing Hargrave's letter. "This implicates you in Vane's murder. The wax, your secret undeniable." Thorne's composure shattered, his glass slipping to the floor. "God help me. Yes, I orchestrated it. Vane hoarded the secret, refusing to share. After India debts, mounted gambling, investments gone awry. I needed the gold. Hargrave laid the wire. I provided the means. But Edmund, he discovered my plans, twisted them with Clara's aid. They meant to betray me, claim it all, and the telegrams. I asked Edmund's flourish to terrorize Eleanor. He believed she knew more than she let on. Holmes's eyes bored into him. The coordinates give them. Thorne laughed hollowly. Vane changed them, only he knew the truth. Cave at 34 North, that's all I have, from old talks. Eleanor must hold the rest. Arrest followed swiftly, Lestrade's men cuffing the broken pier. But as we left, a shot echoed from the street, a sniper's bullet shattering the window. Grazing Thorne's arm. "Edmund," Thorne cried. "He silences me." We pursued the shooter through alleys, Holmes's keen sight spotting a cloaked figure vanishing into a sewer grate. He evades, but the net tightens. Back at Baker Street, Vane awaited, anxious. News from Surreyant, safe, but a prowler. Sighted, guards chased him off. Holmes paced. Edmund circles, desperate for the full secret. We must lure him, a plan formed. Feign Thorne's death from the shot, announce it in papers, draw Edmund to gloat or search his father's study. Vane volunteered as bait, posing as a grieving relative. The trap set. We hid in Thorne's house that night, shadows our allies. Midnight brought footsteps, soft, stealthy. A figure entered the study, rifling drawers. Now, Holmes sprang. Lantern flaring. Edmund Thorne whirled, pistol in hand. "Holmes, you meddle." Vane disarmed him with a naval tackle, cuffs clicking, for Uncle Rupert. Under interrogation, Edmund confessed, allied with Clara since her seduction years ago. He killed Vane for the secret, using Hargrave as pawn, setting the fire to destroy evidence after learning partial coordinates from eavesdropping on Mrs. Vane via a hidden microphone in Surrey modern gadgetry from his engineering pursuits. The star-marked cave, he sneered. With 34 North, 71 East, Vane's whisper completed it. Holmes nodded. Your greed undoes you. The gold remains buried. The crown claims it now. As Lestrade led him away, a final twist. Mrs. Vane's wire arrived. Secret safe. Coordinates. False Rupert's ruse. True vocation destroyed with him. The confrontation unmasked the puppeteer, but the widow's secret endured. A final safeguard against avarice's grasp. Chapter 11. The Mastermind. The arrest of Edmund Thorne in his father's fire-scarred Mayfair residence had peeled back yet another layer of the intricate conspiracy surrounding Colonel Rupert Vane's murder. Yet the revelation of Mrs. Vane's final telegrams at the whispered coordinates were a deliberate falsehood cast a new light on the affair. As Sherlock Holmes and I returned to Baker Street in the early hours, the city's streets lay quiet under a mantle of stars, the silence, broken only by the distant clatter of a late-night cab. Lieutenant James Vane, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion, accompanied us. His role as an ally now cemented by his bravery in subduing his cousin Edmund, Holmes. Seated by the window, lit his pipe, the glow illuminating his sharp features, as he contemplated the latest twist. "Mrs. Vane's cunning is admirable, Watson," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. Her husband foresaw the greed his secret would unleash and armed her with the false coordinates to mislead pursuers. Yet Edmund's confession of 34 North, 71 East, typed on Miss Morton's machine, suggests he believed it true. The mastermind, then, is not Edmund, nor even Clara Morton, but one who orchestrated the telegram's persistence, exploiting every player. I leaned forward, puzzled. But who? Holmes. Hargrave is in custody, Sir Reginald broken, Edmund captured, and Clara at sea. Could another remain? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Precisely, Watson. The telegram's timing postdating Clara's departure implies a confederate in London, one with access to her typewriter and knowledge of the caves. The microphone in Surrey, a modern contraption, points to someone with resources and cunning. We must revisit the widow's safe house, for the prowler reported there holds the key. Vane, nursing his bandaged shoulder, interjected. My aunt mentioned no visitors save the guards. Could one of Lestrade's men be compromised? A possibility, Holmes replied. But first, we interrogate Edmund further. His slip about the microphone was telling he overheard Mrs. Vane's sleep talk, but who placed the device? We hastened to Scotland Yard, where Edmund Thorne sat in a cell, his youthful arrogance replaced by a sullen defiance. His sharp features, so like his father's, twisted as Holmes entered. You've won nothing, Holmes, he sneered. The gold is beyond your reach. Holmes stood, impassive, his voice cold. Your coordinates are false, Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Vane outwitted you, as did her husband, who supplied the microphone in Surrey. Speak, or the gallows await. Edmund's eyes flickered, a crack in his bravado. I bought it from a dealer in Spitalfields, a man named Carver. He said it was for Clara's plan. She wired instructions from the ship, using agents here. I never met the true sender. Carver, Holmes repeated, filing the name. Describe him. Short, wiry spectacles, always nervous. Runs a shop off Brick Lane, sells gadgets, curios. Lestrade summoned, dispatched men to Spitalfields, while Holmes turned to Vane. Lieutenant, your aunt's safety is paramount. Return to Surrey, ensure no further devices lurk. Watson and I will pursue this Carver. The journey to Spitalfields was a descent into London's underbelly, where narrow alleys teemed with hawkers and urchins, the air thick with the scent of fried fish and coal dust. Carver's shop, a cluttered den of mechanical oddities, telegraph keys, and peculiar brass instruments, stood at the end of a cobbled lane. The man himself, a bespectacled figure with darting eyes, froze as we entered. Mr. Carver, Holmes said, his tone deceptively mild. You supplied a microphone to Edmund Thorne, used to spy on Mrs. Vane, who commissioned it. Carver stammered, his hands trembling. I deal in novelties, sir. A woman paid me, weeks ago, auburn hair, spoke like quality, gave no name, just cash and a typed note with orders. Holmes produced one of Clara's letters, this typewriter. Carver nodded, pointing to a Remington No. 2 in the corner, its E misaligned. She used it here, typed her own messages. said it was for a family matter. Holmes's gaze hardened, and the telegrams, sent from Whitechapel, Carver, paled. She had a boy-run-them street lad, paid in shillings. I swear, I thought it harmless. Under pressure, he revealed a cache of Clara's notes, hidden in a tin box, plans to monitor Mrs. Vane, instructions for Edmund, and a cryptic reference to the silent partner. She mentioned him once, Carver whispered. A man of influence, never named, who'd join her in Bombay. Holmes pocketed the notes. You've aided murder, Carver. Lestrade will deal with you. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the notes beside the journal. The silent partner, he mused. Not Sir Reginald, nor Edmund someone higher, orchestrating from the wings. Clara's not the mastermind. She's a lieutenant, executing orders for a shadow. Vane's wire arrived. Surrey secure, no devices. Ant recalls a visitor, naval officer, friend of James, asking about India last month. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A naval officer, lieutenant, who visited your aunt with you. Vane frowned. Lieutenant Charles Harrow, my shipmate. He admired uncle, asked about his campaigns. Surely not. Holmes sprang up. Harrow, the silent partner, embedded close to you. Naval training, access to gadgets, knowledge of Vane's past. Where is he? Portsmouth, Vane said, stunned. On leave, due back tomorrow. Holmes wired Portsmouth, confirming Harrow's absence, then dispatched Lestrade to intercept him. But a return wire chilled us. Harrow had boarded a steamer for India, hours ahead of Clara's ship. The mastermind, Holmes declared. Harrow used Vane's trust, spied on Mrs. Vane, and fed Clara the plan. He sails to secure the gold, believing the coordinates true. We raced to Tilbury, hoping to intercept Harrow's ship, but it had sailed. Holmes, undeterred, wired the Bombay authorities, detain Lieutenant Charles Harrow, suspect in murder and theft. As we returned, a final telegram from Mrs. Vane. Rupert's secret safe. Gold cursed, let it lie. Holmes smiled grimly. The mastermind escapes, but the widow's wisdom prevails. The gold remains buried, its curse unbroken. The confrontation had unmasked Harrow, but India awaited. The final act of greed's tragedy. Chapter 12. The twist unraveled the unmasking of Lieutenant Charles. Harrow, as the silent partner in the grand conspiracy, had brought us tantalizingly close to the heart of the mystery. Yet Sherlock Holmes, with his inexhaustible capacity for deduction, sensed that the threads of deceit were not yet fully unwound. As we gathered in the sitting room of 2-1B Baker Street on the evening following Harrow's flight to India, the atmosphere was heavy with the residue of revelations. The fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Lined with Holmes's chemical apparatus and his meticulously indexed files. While outside, the London fog pressed against the windows like a shroud. Lieutenant James Vane, his naval uniform slightly dishevelled from the day's exertions, sat rigidly in an armchair, his blue eyes fixed on Holmes with a mixture of admiration and lingering shock. Inspector Lestrade, ever the pragmatic foil to Holmes's brilliance, paced the room, his boots thudding softly on the Persian rug. I, Dr. John Watson, occupied my customary seat by the hearth, my notebook open on my knee, ready to chronicle the unfolding drama. Holmes stood by the mantel, his lean figure silhouetted against the flames, his pipe clenched between his teeth. As he regarded us all with that penetrating gaze which seemed to pierce the very soul. "Gentlemen," he said at last, his voice low and measured, We have peeled away the layers of this onion of intrigue. Grave, the brute. Sir Reginald, the debtor. Edmund, the ambitious son. Clara Morton, the seductress. And now Harrow, the naval schemer. Each played their part in the tragic demise of Colonel Rupert Vane, driven by the siren call of the Punjab gold. Yet one piece remains elusive, a shadow that has danced just beyond our grasp. Lestrade halted his pacing, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. What more, Holmes? Harrow sails for Bombay, armed with false coordinates, and the widow's secret lies safe. The Crown can dispatch agents to intercept him at port. The case is closed, surely. Holmes's lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile. Closed, Inspector. Not while the telegram's origin nags at me. The last message, intercepted at Larkspur Road, bore a postmark from Portsmouth. Harrow's domain. Yes, but consider the timing. Harrow departed before Mrs. Vane's sleep whisper in Surrey. How, then, did he acquire the partial coordinates to pair with his own knowledge? Vane shifted uncomfortably, his hand absently touching his bandaged shoulder. Perhaps Clara wired him from sea, or Edmund confessed under duress. Holmes shook his head, his eyes never leaving Vane's face. No, Lieutenant. The microphone in Surrey was placed after Harrow's involvement was suspected. Yet the eavesdropping yielded 34 North Star-marked cave, a decoy, as Mrs. Vane confirmed. The true mastermind would discern the ruse, but Harrow pursues it. Blindly, there is one among us who has played a subtler game, feigning loyalty while pulling strings from within. I felt a chill run down my spine, the implication dawning. Holmes, you cannot mean, yes, Watson, Holmes interjected, his voice sharp. Lieutenant James Vane, step forward. To my astonishment, Vane rose without protest, his face paling though his bearing remained erect, a testament to his military discipline. The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Lestrade's hand instinctively moved toward his cuffs, while I stared in disbelief at the young man who had proven himself an ally in the heat of battle. Holmes circled Vane slowly, his eyes taking in every detail, the faint tremor in the lieutenant's hand, the subtle shift in his posture. You have been masterful, Lieutenant, Holmes said, his tone almost admiring. Your arrival in London, timed impeccably after your uncle's death, your professed grief and eagerness to aid, even your wound in Mayfair, a graze conveniently. Superficial, but greed betrays, as it always does. Vane's jaw tightened, but he met Holmes's gaze steadily. You accuse me falsely, Mr. Holmes. I loved my uncle. I seek only justice. Holmes stopped before him, producing a small envelope from his pocket, the letter from Colonel Vane's club locker, addressed to James. This missive, discovered by us in your uncle's locker, warns of Thorne, Hargrave, and Clara, yet omits Harrow, your shipmate, your confidant. Why? Because you introduced Harrow to the family, Lieutenant, under the guise of friendship, allowing him to pry into the Colonel's past. Your questions to Mrs. Vane about India were not innocent. They were probes relayed to Harrow, who in turn enlisted Clara and the Thornes. Lestrade grunted in surprise. Evidence, Holmes. Holmes drew forth the telegram slip, the one intercepted bearing the Portsmouth mark. This paper, Lieutenant, matches the stationery in your quarters at the inn subtly watermarked with the naval crest. The boy who delivered it to Larkspur Road described a uniformed man, tall and fair, much like yourself. And the microphone in Surrey, you placed it during your protective visit, wiring it to a receiver in your room. overhearing the decoy coordinates which you then fed to Harrow as bait, ensuring he pursued a false trail while you maneuvered. For the true secret, Vane's composure cracked, his shoulders sagging. How did you know? Holmes's smile was cold. Your wound, Lieutenant, self-inflicted graze to garner trust, but the powder burns on your sleeve betrayed. The close range. Your eagerness to confront Thorn, wearing my wire, yet the recording captured a faint code in your words, a signal to Edmund. And finally, your aunt's sleep whisper. She mentioned no eavesdropper, but you reported the prowler to divert suspicion. From yourself, Vane sank into the chair, his face ashen. It was the gold. Uncle's stories inflamed me. Harrow and I planned Itu's Clara's grudge, Thorn's debts, to pressure him. When he refused, the accident. But I never meant murder. Harrow pulled the wire. I only distracted Uncle that morning. Lestrade stepped forward, cuffs ready. You're under arrest, Vane. Accessory to murder, at least. As the inspector led him away, Vane turned, his voice pleading. The treasure, it corrupts all. Forgive me, Aunt. Holmes watched him go, his expression somber. Greed's facade crumbles under scrutiny. Watson. Vane's loyalty was the perfect mask, but details, the devil's playground, unraveled it. The twist complete, the mastermind familial betrayers stood. Exposed, the widow's telegram, a plea that unearthed the rot within. Chapter 13. The treasure's fate, the exposure of Lieutenant James. Vane, as the architect of betrayal, had brought the curtain down on the domestic stage of this tragic drama. Yet the echoes of greed reverberated across oceans, where Clara Morton and Charles Harrow pursued a phantom prize in the distant Suleiman Caves. As Sherlock Holmes and I sat in the familiar confines of 2-1B Baker Street on the morning after Vane's arrest, the room was bathed in a rare winter sunlight that pierced the grimy panes, illuminating the detritus of the case-scattered telegrams, the Colonel's journal, and the incriminating handkerchief. Holmes, ensconced in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, gazed into the fire with an expression of quiet satisfaction, though his keen eyes betrayed a lingering vigilance. Watson, he said at length, breaking the silence. The human heart is a labyrinth more convoluted than any London fog. Vane's duplicity, masked by familial bonds, was the linchpin. His naval connections provided Harrow the means, Clara the motive, and the Thorns the muscle. Yet the treasure's fate remains undecided. The false coordinates will lead Harrow and Morton into peril. But justice demands we prevent further bloodshed. I nodded, stirring my tea. Shall we alert the authorities in India? The Viceroy could dispatch troops to the caves. Holmes rose, crossing to the window where he parted the curtains to survey the bustling street below. Indeed, but first, we consult Mrs. Vane. Her husband's legacy is hers to bequeath. If the gold exists, it belongs to the Crown, not scavengers. A telegram from Lestrade arrived, confirming Vane's confession. He had orchestrated the threats to pressure his uncle, staging the accident when words failed, all while posing as the avenger. Clara, his unwitting pawn, sailed ignorant of the deception. We journeyed to Surrey, where Mrs. Vane awaited in a quaint cottage guarded by constables. Her face, though marked by sorrow, held a newfound resolve. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, she said, ushering us into a sunlit parlour, James's betrayal wounds deepest. Rupert warned of greed's curse, but I never suspected our own kin. Holmes seated himself, his gaze intent. Madam, The false coordinates were a masterstroke. But does the treasure truly exist, or was it a myth to safeguard something else? She hesitated, then retrieved a small, locked box from a bureau. Rupert confided the truth on his last night. The gold was no metal hoard, but documents, rebel codes, maps to hidden arms caches, vital to British interests in the Punjab. He buried them in the caves to prevent misuse, altering records to deter thieves. The legend of gold was his shield. Only I know the true sight. A twist unveiled, not riches, but secrets of empire. Holmes's eyes sparkled, brilliant. The conspirators chase shadows, while the real treasure secures the realm. Mrs. Vane unlocked the box, revealing a ciphered map. I'll surrender it to the War Office, as Rupert wished. Let the fate be honourable. We escorted her to London, where officials received the map with gratitude, promising discretion. As for Harrow and Morton, wires to Bombay ensured their arrest upon arrival. Charged with conspiracy. Back at Baker Street, Holmes reflected. The treasure's fate, Watson knowledge, not gold, preserved from avarice. The case closed, the widow's telegram a catalyst for truth's triumph over treachery. Chapter 14. The final telegram, the resolution of the Punjab treasure's true nature as a cache of imperial secrets, rather than a hoard of glittering gold, had brought a measure of closure to the tangled affair of Colonel Rupert Vane's murder. Yet the air in 221B Baker Street remained charged with the afterglow of a case well fought. As evening settled over London on the day following our return from Surrey, the familiar clutter of our sitting-room papers strewn across the table, the Colonel's journal now closed, and the faint scent of Holmes's shag tobacco lingering seemed to pulse with the echoes of the widow's desperate plea. Sherlock Holmes, seated by the fire, his violin resting idle on his knee, gazed into the flames with a contemplative air, his sharp features softened by the ruddy light. I, Dr. John Watson, occupied my usual chair, my pen poised over my notebook, striving to capture the final threads of this extraordinary narrative. The revelations of Lieutenant James Vane's betrayal, the unmasking of Charles Harrow as the silent orchestrator, and the thwarted ambitions of Clara Morton and the Thorns had woven a tapestry of greed and deception. Yet Mrs. Vane's courage in safeguarding her husband's legacy stood as a beacon of integrity. The surrender of the ciphered map to the War Office had ensured the security of British interests in the Punjab, but I sensed in Holmes a restlessness, as if some final note remained unplayed. Holmes, I ventured, setting down my pen, the case is resolved, is it not? The conspirators are in custody or pursuit, the treasure secured, and Mrs. Vane safe. What lingers to trouble you? He turned his piercing grey eyes upon me, a faint smile curling his lips. You know me too well, Watson. The mechanics of the plot are Claire Vane's murder, the telegrams, the false trail to the Suleiman caves, but the human heart, ever capricious, leaves shadows. Why, for instance, did Mrs. Vane withhold the map's existence until the 11th hour? And what of Clara Morton's fate, now that Bombay authorities await her ship? Before I could respond, a sharp rap at the door announced Mrs. Hudson, her face bearing a familiar blend of exasperation and concern. Mr. Holmes, a telegram for you, just arrived. The boy said it was urgent. Holmes took the yellow slip with his customary precision, unfolding it with a flick of his wrist. His brows lifted slightly as he read, then passed it to me. The message was brief, yet its words carried a weight of finality. Mr. Holmes, 221B, Baker Street. My thanks for your justice. The past is buried. E. Vane, Surrey. I looked up, meeting Holmes's gaze. A farewell, it seems. She acknowledges your work. Holmes nodded, rising to pace the room, his dressing gown swishing softly. More than that, Watson. The phrase "the past is buried" echoes her husband's letter, his warning of the gold's curse. She confirms the deception's end, yet her silence on the map earlier suggests a fear not wholly dispelled. Perhaps she suspected another listener, even in hiding. A chill ran through me at the thought. Another Confederate, but Harrow, Vane, and the Thorns are accounted for. Holmes paused by the window, parting the curtains to peer into the gaslit street below, where shadows moved in the fog. Possibly, but unlikely. Her caution was born of instinct, not evidence. The true danger lies abroad. Clara, Morton, and Harrow, chasing a mirage. The Viceroy's men will intercept them, but their desperation may yet spark violence. He turned, tossing the telegram into the fire, where it curled and blackened in the flames. The case is closed, Watson, as Lestrade would have it. The widow's last telegram seals it, a plea answered, a legacy preserved. Yet London's undercurrents never still. Tomorrow, no doubt, another mystery will knock. I watched the paper burn, its ashes mingling with the embers, and felt a pang of awe at my friend's relentless pursuit of truth. You've unravelled a labyrinth, Holmes. The Colonel's honour, Mrs. Vane's safety justice, as you say, is the true treasure. He inclined his head, a rare gesture of acknowledgement. Well said, Watson. Now, pass me that tobacco pouch, and let us have a moment's peace before the next storm. As I complied, the firelight danced across the room, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of the city's endless enigmas. The widow's final telegram had marked the end of one chapter, but with Sherlock Holmes as my companion, I knew the book of adventure was far from closed.